Life doesn't really begin until we have understood who we really are. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, said that life really begins at the age of 40. Until then, we are just preparing ourselves, gathering experiences, shaping our identity, and trying to understand the world. This idea challenges the traditional view that youth is the peak of existence. We grow up hearing that middle age is a period of crisis, a phase of loss and decay, but Jung saw this time as an awakening, not a decline. The first years of adulthood are marked by an external search. We seek a place in society, work to build a career, form relationships, and try to live up to imposed expectations. Our focus is on the approval of others, on achieving status and security. During this period, we follow ready-made scripts, believing that by reaching certain milestones, a good job, a stable marriage, professional recognition, we will find happiness. But over time, many realize that even though they have achieved these things, they still feel an emptiness. Jung believed that this dissatisfaction arises because, in youth, we prioritize the creation of the persona, the external identity that we show to the world. This social self is necessary for navigating society, but it doesn't represent our totality. Over time, we realize that this mask is not enough. When we reach middle age, the first cracks begin to appear. Work may no longer be as rewarding, relationships may lose meaning, and old goals seem less important. This discomfort is not a sign of failure, but a call for transformation. At the age of 40, many begin to ask themselves, is this it? What really matters to me? This question marks the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all the parts of our being, going beyond the image we have constructed for the world. If in youth the concern was to belong and conquer, now the search turns inwards. It's no longer about meeting external expectations, but about discovering what really makes sense. This process can be uncomfortable, as it requires confronting truths that we have avoided for years. Neuroscience supports this change. Studies show that as we get older, the brain becomes more emotionally balanced. The areas linked to the regulation of emotions become stronger, reducing impulsivity and increasing the capacity for reflection. This explains why many people in middle age come to value inner peace and authenticity over competition and status. The need to prove something to the world diminishes, giving way to a search for real meaning. However, this transition doesn't happen in a linear fashion. Some people experience a shock when they realize that they have spent years living according to standards that no longer make sense. Others face external events, such as the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, or health problems, that force them to reevaluate their lives. Whatever the path, this phase can feel like a crossroads, continuing to follow what is familiar or risking living more authentically. This change of perspective doesn't mean abandoning everything that has been built up, but rather reinterpreting it in the light of a new understanding. Psychology suggests that after 40, people begin to let go of external pressures and focus more on what really fulfills them. Psychologist Daniel Levinson studied the cycles of adult life and identified this phase as the midlife transition, a period of profound re-evaluation. Studies in positive psychology also indicate that, contrary to popular belief, levels of happiness tend to increase after 40 as there is less concern with status and more focus on what really brings satisfaction. In this way, middle age is not a decline, but an opportunity for rebirth. It's when we let go of the illusions of youth and start looking for a life more in line with who we really are. The question stops being, how can I prove my worth, and becomes, how can I live more truthfully? This awakening can be the beginning of a much richer and more meaningful existence, when we realize that much of what we have done so far has been influenced by external expectations. A moment of questioning arises. It's not just frustration at having followed a predetermined path, but the opportunity to finally choose for oneself. Jung called this process individuation, the transition to a more authentic life, where we stop living for others and start living according to our values. This transformation doesn't happen suddenly. At first, subtle doubts arise. Is this what I want for the rest of my life? Or am I really happy with my choices? These questions can appear after a success that didn't bring satisfaction, a moment of boredom in the routine, or a significant event such as a milestone birthday. At first, we try to ignore them, but they come back stronger and stronger until they become impossible to avoid. Society often interprets this phase as a midlife crisis, portraying it as a period of confusion, impulsive changes, and regrets. But Jung saw this transition as an awakening, not a breakdown. The feeling of restlessness is not a sign of failure, but a call for transformation. When we stop seeing ourselves only in terms of the roles we play, professional, father, mother, partner, we begin to question our true identity. During our youth, we build what Jung called a persona, the social identity we create in order to be accepted and recognized. This role helps us gain respect and stability, but if we become too attached to it, we end up trapped in a limited version of ourselves. Middle age exposes the cracks in this persona. What once seemed sufficient now appears superficial. We realize that professional success, recognition, and stability are not enough if they are not aligned with something deeper. The real challenge of this phase is not just to question what we've done so far, but to face up to what we've avoided. Jung called this the shadow, everything we repressed for fear of judgment or not fitting in with what was expected of us. Our fears, hidden desires, and insecurities are part of who we are, and ignoring them prevents us from achieving a fulfilling life. The process of individuation requires us to accept both our strengths and our vulnerabilities. This transition can be uncomfortable as it forces us to review decisions, admit that some choices were based on external expectations, and, in some cases, change course. But this doesn't mean abandoning everything we've built. Instead of breaking with the past, individuation allows us to reframe it, integrating our experiences in a more conscious way. Often, this change is accompanied by a review of priorities. Before, we were driven by the search for status, security, and recognition. Now we value authenticity, inner peace, and genuine relationships more. This change in perspective is not just psychological. Neuroscience shows that over time, the brain becomes less reactive and more emotionally balanced, favoring reflection over impulsivity. This explains why, in middle age, many people lose interest in competing or proving their worth and start to focus on what is really meaningful. This transformation can generate fear, as it forces us out of our comfort zone. Many people resist this change, trying to cling to the past or ignoring internal signs of dissatisfaction. But fighting this transition only prolongs the feeling of stagnation. Accepting it, on the other hand, opens doors to a new phase of life, one where choices are made not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. Individuation doesn't mean throwing away everything we've built, but rather making an honest reassessment. It's a process that requires courage, as it involves confronting uncomfortable truths and giving up illusions. But this journey is not about losing something, but about gaining a new perspective. As we advance in this transformation, we realize that true fulfillment lies not in external achievements, but in the coherence between who we are inside and the life we choose to lead. This is the true meaning of individuation, becoming whole, integrating all parts of ourselves, and living with authenticity. Throughout life, we learn to play roles, we build careers, form families, and follow patterns that guarantee us acceptance and stability. However, at some point, these roles begin to feel insufficient. What once made sense becomes questionable, and the persona we created no longer fully represents who we are. This discomfort marks the beginning of the real work of transformation. Jung called this process individuation, which involves integrating all parts of our personality, including those we have repressed. This means facing the shadow, the hidden side that we avoid in order to maintain social acceptance. The shadow contains our fears, repressed desires, and aspects of our personality that we have learned to hide. Ignoring it generates internal conflict. Accepting it allows us to grow. In middle age, this need for integration becomes more urgent. What once seemed sufficient, status, professional success, social approval, is no longer enough. The focus is no longer on external achievements, but on the meaning of existence. We begin to ask ourselves, what really matters to me? These questions force us to look inwards because their answers lie not in what others expect, but in what truly resonates with our essence. This change of perspective alters our priorities. During our youth, we are driven by the need to prove our worth. We seek recognition and security, often ignoring our authentic desires. But as we mature, we realize that real value lies not in how we are perceived, but in how much our life reflects who we really are. Individuation leads us to act with more intention and purpose, abandoning the need to please everyone. Science supports this transition. Studies show that as we get older, our brains become more emotionally balanced. Impulsive reactions decrease and the capacity for reflection increases. This explains why, in middle age, many people swap the pursuit of status for more meaningful experiences. Superficial relationships lose ground to authentic connections, and the need to compete gives way to the desire to live more lightly. This process is not without its challenges. Facing the shadow can be uncomfortable as it requires facing truths that we have avoided for years. This can lead to existential crises, career changes, or breakups in relationships that no longer make sense. But this rupture is actually a reconstruction. What seems like a collapse can actually be a liberation. Jung believed that individuation doesn't mean rejecting the past, but integrating it in a more conscious way. Instead of trying to regain our youth or resist change, we can accept this transition as a natural evolution. This allows us to live without the pressure of living up to external expectations, focusing on what really brings us satisfaction. This phase is an invitation to live more authentically. Instead of following imposed standards, we can reevaluate what we really want. The fear of the unknown still exists, but it no longer paralyzes us. Individuation teaches us that we don't need all the answers to move forward. We just need the courage to live according to our truth. Over time, our way of looking at life changes. We become less reactive and more introspective, realizing that much of what concerned us before no longer has the same importance. This change doesn't happen by chance. Studies show that as we get older, the brain becomes more efficient at regulating emotions, helping us to cope better with challenges and to value meaningful experiences. This new perspective, however, can be accompanied by ruptures. Some relationships no longer make sense. Goals that seemed essential lose their relevance, and the routine that was once comfortable can become suffocating. This transition can be interpreted as a crisis, but in reality, it is a necessary adjustment. As Brené Brown describes it, this period is a falling apart, a moment of deconstruction of the identity we have built to adapt to the world, and which now needs to be reformulated to reflect who we really are. Throughout life, we follow rules, chase recognition, and accumulate achievements in the hope of finding fulfillment. However, in middle age, we begin to realize that none of this guarantees lasting happiness. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl argued that the real driving force in life is not pleasure or success, but meaning. Without it, even the greatest achievements can seem empty. And it is precisely this search for meaning that marks this new phase. This transition can be challenging because it requires us to abandon certainties and face the unknown. Many people hesitate, trapped by fear of change or attachment to the past. But staying in a life that doesn't fulfill us can be more painful than risking something new. What seemed like stability can turn out to be stagnation. And when we ignore this call for transformation, life takes care of reminding us, be it through crises, frustrations, or a persistent feeling of dissatisfaction. Facing this change means facing our fears, fear of failure, of others' judgment, of losing what we have built. But it also means conquering something greater, the freedom to be authentic. Accepting this new phase allows us to live more fully, without the need to prove anything to anyone. Abraham Maslow described this process as self-actualization, the stage in which we seek to fully express who we are without masks or external impositions. And this is the true rebirth of middle age. We stop living only to meet expectations and start building a path based on what really does us good. This transformation is not an end, but a beginning, an invitation to live in a truer and more meaningful way. Middle age is not an end, but an invitation to a new beginning. After years of seeking acceptance, validating achievements, and meeting external expectations, now is the time to look inwards and live more authentically. We stop measuring our worth by what we have or what we have achieved and start asking ourselves what really makes us good. This change in perspective can be daunting, as it requires letting go of what once seemed essential, but it also brings a sense of freedom. For the first time, we have the opportunity to live for ourselves and not just to live up to an ideal that has been imposed on us. Research indicates that, contrary to what many people think, levels of happiness tend to increase after the age of 40. This is because, over time, we learn to better filter what deserves our energy. We stop worrying about other people's judgments, we prioritize quality over quantity in our relationships, and we abandon the need to constantly prove our worth. This transformation allows us to focus on what really matters, replacing the obsession with status and recognition with the search for experiences that bring purpose and fulfillment. Carl Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who we really are, doesn't mean rejecting the past, but consciously integrating it. Everything we've experienced so far, every mistake, challenge, or success, has been part of the path that has brought us to this moment. The difference now is that we can choose to live without illusions, without the need to look to the outside world for what can only be found within us. This doesn't mean that life will become easier or free of difficulties, but the way we deal with challenges changes. Instead of reacting impulsively or letting ourselves be overwhelmed by anxiety, we develop a greater capacity to accept the flow of life. What used to make us suffer is now seen as part of growth. Situations that previously seemed insurmountable are now seen with greater clarity and maturity. It is at this point that we understand that true freedom does not come from the absence of problems, but from the way we choose to face them. We free ourselves from the need for absolute control and learn to trust the process. External changes become less threatening because we know that our internal foundation is firm. Life ceases to be an unbridled race for validation and becomes a journey of self-knowledge and meaning. The great illusion of youth is to believe that happiness lies in something we don't yet have: a better job, a perfect relationship, a stable financial situation. But over time, we realize that even when we achieve these goals, the feeling of fullness doesn't last. This is because lasting satisfaction doesn't come from external achievements, but from a deep connection with ourselves. When we understand this, the way we look at life changes. This turning point doesn't happen overnight. It is the result of a series of small changes, internal adjustments, and conscious choices. Often we begin to feel this transition but resist it for fear of uncertainty. We cling to what is familiar, even if it is no longer good for us, simply because we don't know what comes next. But the longer we put off this transformation, the more we feel the weight of dissatisfaction. Resistance to growth causes more suffering than growth itself. Accepting this transition doesn't mean giving up everything we've built, but rather reevaluating what really makes sense. This may mean changing the way we deal with work, rediscovering new passions, rebuilding relationships, or simply adopting a lighter, more conscious perspective on life. It's a process of realignment in which we allow ourselves to live with more truth and fewer unrealistic expectations. Maturity brings with it the chance to live more deeply. We stop seeking immediate pleasure and start to value what brings meaning. Inner peace becomes more important than external approval. Relationships are no longer based on the need for acceptance, but on genuine connection. Priorities change because we finally understand that what really matters is not outside us, but inside us. If this message resonated with you, if it made you reflect or brought you a new perspective on your own journey, I ask you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps me to keep bringing you this kind of content and gives more people access to these reflections. And if this video has made a difference to your day, helped you see things differently, or contributed to your personal growth, please consider leaving a thanks a lot of any amount. Your support is essential for me to continue producing content that adds value and makes a difference.